Good morning, everyone. I want to talk about ethnic cleansing and genocide this morning. So, real upbeat topics for Sunday. But it's going to focus on Russia and China specifically because that's where we're seeing it most prevalent right now. Now, before I get into that, I want to thank everyone for continuing to donate to Action Against Hunger. I forgot to update my chart above my head. I believe we're at 4,430 or 4,435, somewhere in there. But those donations continue to roll in, and they're providing food aid to Ukraine as well as other countries and other things, hygiene, blankets, etc., to those that are affected by the war and other disasters, etc., across the globe. Also, this isn't going to be a Ukraine update. I'm hopefully going to provide one in the next 24 to 48 hours. The Ukrainian government has asked for Operation Silence because supposedly they have begun the next phase of their offensive campaign, which is focused on Kherson. So rightfully, they're asking for operational silence and operational security. Be mindful of what's going on there. So we won't see any updates to the map at least for another 24 to 48 hours. They'll probably lag behind like the last time. But like I said, this video focuses on ethnic cleansing and genocide, and that's because it's in the news, most prevalent for Russia and China. And that's because Russia continues to conduct a massive forced deportation campaign of Ukrainians, and it's amounting to a deliberate ethnic cleansing campaign. They're admitting to it. They're like proud that this has happened. The Russian deputy prime minister said that several thousand children from Kherson are already in other regions of Russia resting in rest homes and children's camps. That sounds fucking awful. I don't know what he was thinking saying that. Like, he's like, that's a good thing. That sounds fucking horrible. Like, we're taking children from their hometown, putting them in children's camps in Russia. I mean, that's ridiculous. Russian authorities are openly admitting to placing children from occupied areas of Ukraine up for adoption in Russian families. That is a complete violation of the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. Now, the other thing is they're engaged. The Russians are conducting a campaign where they're forcefully moving, or not necessarily forcefully, but incentivizing Russians moving into Ukraine to repopulate Ukrainian cities that have been evacuated with Russian people. And they're moving into Ukrainian homes. This is absolutely ethnic cleansing. And like I've spoke before on this in previous videos, ethnic cleansing by itself is not a crime under international law, but it falls under the crime of genocide in some way. It became more popular after the Yugoslav wars when they talked about ethnic cleansing after the fall of the Soviet Union. They were trying to render an area that is traditionally ethnically homogenous by changing that ethnic background. So if you have ethnic Tatars, for instance, in Crimea, the Russians tried to get rid of their whole culture, their whole people, and place Russian culture. We've seen this in China, and I'll talk about China in a bit. Now, the key here is they're using force and intimidation to remove the people from the area, specifically children who are hugely victimized in this regard. It's designed and carried out by one specific ethnic group, the Russians, against another, which is whatever version of ethnic Ukrainian they have there. Doesn't matter. They want to replace the Ukrainians and brainwash Ukrainian children into the Russian way of thinking. This is an absolutely acceptable tactic for the Russians. They find this to be a common, effect of war. It is something they do. One, because their population right now is dwindling very heavily. They're facing a demographic crisis, largely because something like 90% of their men have faced erectile dysfunction problems, and that is a legitimate statistic from Russia. Russia's lead urologist published that statistics. It is actually something you can find, that impotence is running rampant in Russia. And actually, 1/4 of the men who are considered to be impotent blame women. That's nonsense, but for the course with the way Russians operate. And a lot of it has to do with their alcoholism. But they also are facing an issue where women don't want to have children because Russia sucks so bad. So they have less. When your country is not stable, when it can't provide common services, like Russia hasn't been able to, I don't know, since World War II, they've been kind of ebbed and flowed, but it's a problem because women won't want to have kids, and neither will men, but women mostly, and therefore there's a problem. They don't have the population. So what better way to bolster your population than take some of the population from someone else? Now, this is what exactly is happening. It's not going to be enough to replace the demographic decline, as well as even probably replace the number of deaths that have occurred of Russian soldiers. But make no mistake, thousands of Ukrainian children are now being forcibly deported and re-educated in Russia, and Russia says this is perfectly acceptable, and they're in fact proud of it. So the big thing here is trying to figure out what to do about it. It's hard because a lot of the databases just don't exist in Ukraine. It was not necessarily the most advanced European country. In fact, it's one of the poorest, if not the poorest country in Europe. So trying to regain control of these children will be quite difficult. Now, China, on the other hand, is practicing an alternative version of ethnic cleansing. It's not necessarily re-educating children, but there is re-education going on, and it's also quite disgusting. Several countries, including the US, the United Kingdom, Canada, the Netherlands, other European nations, have accused China of committing genocide and ethnic cleansing as defined by the International Convention that I talked about earlier. The intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national or ethnic, racial, or religious group, and that's what they're doing to the Uyghurs. China has been forcibly mass sterilizing Uyghur women to suppress their population. That is a real thing. They are also separating children from their families, just not as overtly. They're trying to break the cultural traditions of the Uyghurs. The U.S. Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, said that China is committing genocide and crimes against humanity. The U.K. Parliament in 2021 declared that China was committing genocide in Xinjiang, which is where a majority of these Uyghurs live. The UN Human Rights Committee in 2018 said it had credible reports that China was holding up to 1 million people in counter-extremism centers in Xinjiang. Counter-extremism centers is a fancy word for concentration camps. Let's call a spade here. Now, the Australian Strategic Policy Institute found evidence in 2020 of more than 380 of these re-education camps in Xinjiang, which is 40% more than what was originally estimated just a few years before. Now, analysis of data contained in the latest police documents that were pulled from Xinjiang's police files show that 23,000 residents, or about 12% of the adult population, were in camp or in prison at least some point in 2017 and 2018. That's insane. That means that more than 1.2 million Uyghurs and other Turkic minorities, because the Uyghurs are a Turkic minority, at some point were imprisoned just for being a Uyghur. Now, Xinjiang is covered by a network of surveillance, police checkpoints, cameras. They scan license plates. They scan individual faces. They are also using a mobile app to monitor people's behavior, such as how much electricity they're using, how often they use their front door. And President Xi Jinping in 2017 issued an order saying that all religions in China should be of Chinese orientation. The Uyghurs are of Islam faith. So further crackdowns coming in that regard. Campaigners or people are saying that China is trying to eradicate the Uyghur culture, and they are. China obviously denies all of these allegations of human rights abuses in Xinjiang, but says that they are cracking down on the Uyghurs in Xinjiang, and it's necessary to prevent terrorism and root out Islamist extremism. And these camps, they admit that they exist, are an effective tool for re-educating the inmates in the fight against terrorism. So again, I ask those of you that support China and Russia, after hearing all of this, why do you do it? Because it's atrocious.